We've all been taught that being good, kind, and selfless is the ultimate path to success and respect. But what if I told you that every act of goodness carries a hidden price? A price that can silently drain your energy, your influence, and even your wealth. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand the shocking truth about goodness and how mastering it strategically can change your life forever. When we think of goodness, most of us immediately picture noble gestures, selfless acts, and a life devoted to helping others. From an early age, society conditioned us to believe that being good, being kind, generous, and endlessly accommodating is the highest form of human achievement. We are told that those who act without selfishness are the most virtuous, and that their lives will naturally be rewarded with love, respect, and success. But the reality, the shocking truth that very few dare to discuss openly, is that pure goodness comes at a cost so subtle, yet so profoundly influential, that it can quietly drain your energy, erode your influence, and even sabotage the very life you are trying to build. Consider the individual who always says, "Wes," who offers help without hesitation, who gives their time, resources, and energy to anyone in need. On the surface, this person is celebrated, admired, and seen as a paragon of virtue. People smile at their generosity, friends lean on their support, and strangers often come to expect it. But behind this facade of admiration lies an often overlooked reality. Every unmeasured act of goodness carries a hidden price. Each selfless gesture, when extended without limits or discernment, chips away at your vitality, your focus, and your capacity to achieve your personal ambitions. The first hidden cost is exploitation. Human nature is such that not everyone has noble intentions. There are those who recognize the benevolent heart and seek to take advantage of it. They do not offer friendship or collaboration in return. They extract, consume, and leave the giver exhausted. What begins as an act of generosity can, over time, turn into a pattern of being drained emotionally, financially, or mentally. The more you give without strategic intent, the more you inadvertently invite those who will take without giving back. And here lies the paradox: your goodness, which should uplift you and those around you, can become the very source of your suffering if it is unguarded and indiscriminate. The second cost is dilution of focus. When you constantly place the needs of others above your own priorities, you risk scattering your energy across countless directions. Dreams and ambitions, once sharp and clear in your mind, can become blurred by the ceaseless demands of others. Time, the most valuable resource any human possesses, is slowly eroded when one is driven by the desire to satisfy everyone. The paradox is glaring. By trying to do good in every direction, your own potential to make a lasting, meaningful impact diminishes. Then comes the psychological toll. Goodness, when pursued without awareness, often creates an unspoken pressure to maintain approval. The individual who is relentlessly kind may begin to tie their self-worth to the perceptions of others. Every rejection, every ungrateful response becomes a source of internal conflict. Over time, the mind internalizes this as stress, anxiety, or even resentment. The very virtue that was meant to uplift can transform into a silent prison, holding the individual hostage to the expectations and demands of the world around them. And yet, society continues to celebrate unmeasured goodness as a universal ideal. Rarely are we taught the importance of boundaries, of discernment, or of the art of selective generosity. Those who understand this hidden cost, who balance virtue with prudence, are often the ones who rise above the average. They give, but they give strategically. They help, but they do so without compromising their vision, their energy, or their influence. In this way, goodness becomes not a liability, but a tool, a form of personal power that serves both the individual and society. There is also a profound truth about reputation intertwined with this cost. Being too good too often, especially when it comes without discernment, can lead others to underestimate your strength, your intelligence, and your resolve. Kindness misapplied can be seen as weakness, leaving you vulnerable to those who manipulate appearances to exploit the unwary. And it is precisely this misunderstanding, this subtle misperception of virtue, that carries one of the most hidden costs of all, the slow erosion of respect. To truly understand the price of goodness, one must look beyond the surface. It is not a condemnation of virtue, nor a call to abandon kindness. Rather, it is an acknowledgement that every act of goodness carries consequences, and without awareness, those consequences can quietly accumulate, influencing every aspect of life. The wise individual learns to measure, to protect their energy, and to invest their acts of goodness in ways that reinforce their long-term goals and personal well-being. This awareness transforms goodness from a passive, potentially draining habit into an active, strategic tool capable of creating influence, loyalty, and even prosperity. Understanding these hidden costs sets the stage for the next revelation, the difference between selfless, reactive giving and strategic goodness. While the first drains, the second empowers. It is not enough to act with virtue, one must act with purpose, intention, and discernment, because the true power of goodness lies not in the act itself, but in how it is directed, and to what effect it ultimately contributes. While we have explored the hidden costs of pure goodness, it is equally important to understand that goodness, when applied strategically, is not a weakness, but one of the most potent forms of personal power. Strategic goodness is the deliberate, conscious choice to act with virtue while simultaneously safeguarding your energy, resources, and goals. It is a principle that transforms ordinary kindness into a powerful instrument for influence, trust, and lasting success. Unlike unmeasured goodness, which drains and exposes the individual to exploitation, strategic goodness creates leverage, allowing one to uplift others without compromising one's own mission in life. The first step in understanding strategic goodness is recognizing that every act of generosity carries weight. Nothing we give, whether it is time, knowledge, or assistance, is insignificant. Yet, not all acts are equal in their impact. The individual who masters strategic goodness learns to evaluate where their actions will produce the greatest return, not in monetary terms alone, but in relationships, reputation, and alignment with personal objectives. This is not a calculation of selfishness, it is a recognition that our energy, our time, and our attention are finite resources. By directing acts of goodness where they can multiply in effect, one ensures that the virtue extended becomes an investment rather than a drain. Consider the power of influence. Human beings are naturally drawn to those who demonstrate consistent integrity and a willingness to help, especially when it is guided by wisdom. Strategic goodness is about giving in ways that inspire trust and loyalty without fostering dependency or exploitation. When people witness kindness that is deliberate, thoughtful, and purposeful, they not only respect the giver, but are more likely to align themselves with the giver's vision and mission. Influence, then, becomes the silent reward of strategic virtue. It is an intangible asset that cannot be bought. yet it is priceless in its capacity to open doors, create opportunities, and forge lasting alliances. Moreover, strategic goodness requires emotional intelligence. The wise individual knows that giving impulsively or indiscriminately can lead to imbalance. Emotional intelligence allows one to discern when and where goodness is needed and when it might be counterproductive. For instance, offering help to someone unwilling to accept guidance can be a waste of energy, while offering support to someone poised to act on it can create exponential outcomes. In this sense, strategic goodness is not reactive, it is anticipatory, guided by foresight, and focused on results. It requires the ability to read situations, understand motives, and align one's actions with the broader objectives of influence and personal growth. Another aspect of strategic goodness is the cultivation of reciprocal relationships. Those who act with strategy understand that kindness can be both given and received in ways that build mutual benefit. This does not mean expecting something in return for every act of generosity, but it does mean recognizing that relationships are not one-sided. By creating an ecosystem of value exchange, where every act of goodness strengthens connections and fosters mutual respect, the strategic individual builds a network of allies and supporters capable of amplifying their influence. The key distinction is intentionality. Acts are not performed blindly, but with awareness of the impact they generate. Strategic goodness also carries with it an element of resilience. By choosing where to invest energy and how to engage with the world, the individual avoids burnout, maintains clarity of purpose, and ensures that their moral compass remains intact. Unlike reactive goodness, which can leave one feeling depleted and resentful, strategic goodness empowers. It reinforces self-respect while simultaneously enhancing the welfare of others. It is the art of giving in such a way that both the giver and receiver benefit, and in doing so, the giver amplifies their personal power rather than diminishes it. Furthermore, strategic goodness has long-term consequences that far exceed the immediate moment. While spontaneous acts of kindness may bring temporary satisfaction, strategic goodness builds reputation, credibility, and influence over time. One becomes known not only as a person of virtue, but as a person of wisdom, someone whose actions consistently produce results, inspire loyalty, and command respect. It is a transformation of character that distinguishes ordinary individuals from those who leave a lasting mark on the lives they touch. The power of strategic goodness, therefore, lies not in the act itself, but in the thought, intention, and foresight behind it. It is the understanding that every interaction, every offering, and every gesture carries weight, and that when directed with purpose, goodness becomes an instrument of influence, leverage, and long-term success. The individual who masters this principle does not simply give, they give with strategy, clarity, and alignment with a vision that transcends immediate gratification. This mastery of strategic goodness naturally leads to another critical dimension, the psychological price of seeking constant approval, and how strategic virtue shields one from the exhausting trap of living to please everyone. When goodness is practiced with foresight and intent, it prevents the mind from being consumed by the relentless need for validation, allowing the individual to act from power rather than compulsion, and to focus on what truly matters in the pursuit of success. We have seen how strategic goodness transforms kindness into influence and power, But even strategic actions cannot fully shield us from a deeper human vulnerability, the relentless need for approval. Seeking approval is a subtle force that can shape behavior, dictate decisions, and quietly erode both personal freedom and mental clarity. Most people are unaware of how much energy they spend chasing the validation of others, believing that approval is synonymous with worth. That being liked by everyone is the ultimate marker of success. But this belief comes at a high psychological cost, one that often goes unnoticed until it has already taken root. The desire for approval is deeply embedded in human nature. From childhood, we are conditioned to seek affirmation from parents, teachers, peers, and society at large. Praise becomes a measure of value, and criticism becomes a source of self-doubt. While early forms of approval seeking are natural and even necessary for social development, when this pattern extends into adulthood, it becomes a form of subtle imprisonment. The individual begins to live not according to their own principles and goals, but according to the expectations and judgments of others. Every choice becomes a calculated attempt to satisfy, impress, or placate. And over time, this leads to a quiet erosion of autonomy and inner strength. One of the most damaging aspects of this pattern is the stress it generates. Constantly striving to be liked, constantly adjusting behavior to meet external expectations, creates an ongoing state of tension. The mind is perpetually preoccupied, evaluating reactions, predicting responses, and measuring the consequences of every word and action. Sleep becomes restless, focus becomes scattered, and the natural flow of creativity and initiative is stifled. Even acts of genuine kindness, when performed with the hope of approval rather than from strategic intent or authentic virtue, become exhausting rather than empowering. What should elevate and energize the individual instead drains them, leaving an invisible, cumulative burden that grows heavier with time. Another hidden cost of seeking approval is the subtle erosion of self-confidence. When the foundation of self-worth depends on the judgments of others, every criticism, slight, or perceived rejection feels disproportionately significant. Decisions are postponed or avoided entirely for fear of disapproval. Ambitions are muted because pursuing them might provoke envy or skepticism. The individual begins to conform, to shrink themselves, and to prioritize safety over growth. This slow compromise of personal power is often invisible to the outside world, but it leaves deep, lasting scars internally. Furthermore, the need for approval fosters dependency on external validation. The individual begins to measure every success, every gesture, and every relationship by the responses it generates. Happiness becomes conditional, tied to applause, affirmation, and acceptance. Freedom, the very quality necessary for bold action and visionary thinking, becomes secondary to the fluctuating opinions of others. In essence, the person becomes a prisoner of perception, tethered to the ever-changing whims and standards of those around them. The paradox is striking. The very goodness that society celebrates, when intertwined with the need for approval, can become a source of psychological bondage. People who genuinely want to do good may find themselves exhausted by the invisible demands of constant judgment. They may act not from wisdom or purpose, but from fear of rejection, craving the approval that seems essential to their identity. This is why so many kind, talented, and capable individuals fail to achieve the impact they are capable of. They give outwardly, but inwardly, their energy is fragmented and their decisions are compromised by the subtle but relentless need for approval. The antidote to this lies in self-awareness and intentionality. Recognizing the patterns of approval seeking is the first step toward reclaiming mental freedom. When acts of goodness, kindness, and contribution are guided by purpose and personal principles rather than the desire for external validation, the psychological burden lifts. One begins to act from power rather than compulsion, from vision rather than fear. This is where strategic goodness and disciplined self-respect intersect. By balancing kindness with personal boundaries, the individual can extend virtue without surrendering autonomy. A key aspect of overcoming this psychological trap is learning to say no, not as a form of denial, but as an act of self-preservation. Saying no is an assertion of control over one's time, energy, and attention, a statement that personal priorities matter as much as the expectations of others. By establishing these boundaries, the individual reduces stress, preserves mental clarity, and strengthens self-confidence. Approval seeking diminishes because actions are now guided by principle and purpose, not by the hope of applause or acceptance. Finally, the liberation from the need for approval allows the mind to focus on meaningful pursuits. Energy that was once drained by the constant monitoring of others' reactions is redirected toward growth, innovation, and achievement. The individual can act decisively, take calculated risks, and extend strategic goodness with precision and impact. The cost of constant approval is revealed not just in lost energy, but in lost opportunities, unrealized potential, and diminished influence. By breaking free from this trap, one gains the psychological freedom necessary to transform virtue into power, paving the way to mastery of influence, integrity, and lasting success. By now, it is clear that goodness, while inherently valuable, carries both hidden costs and profound opportunities. When practiced without awareness, it can drain energy, invite exploitation, and entangle the mind in the relentless pursuit of approval. Yet, when understood and applied strategically, goodness transforms from a passive virtue into a dynamic tool for influence, leadership, and enduring impact. Transforming goodness into a path to influence requires a mindset shift, recognizing that true power is not about coercion, manipulation, or control, but about inspiring, guiding, and creating value in ways that leave a lasting impression. The first step in this transformation is intentionality. Influence is rarely accidental. It is the result of consistent, purposeful action aligned with clear principles and vision. Acts of goodness, when delivered with awareness of their consequences, become far more than isolated gestures. They become signals, messages that communicate character, integrity, and strength. When one acts with both virtue and vision, others begin to perceive that every decision, every act of support is deliberate and meaningful. This is the essence of strategic influence. People are drawn not merely to kindness itself, but to the strength and purpose that underlie it. Another critical element is consistency. Influence grows in proportion to the reliability and predictability of one's actions. A person who demonstrates strategic goodness consistently, offering guidance, support, and collaboration without wavering, builds trust that cannot be purchased or faked. Trust is the invisible currency of influence, and those who wield it effectively command attention, respect, and loyalty. Unlike popularity, which is fleeting and often tied to superficial approval, influence built on consistent strategic goodness endures over time. It is remembered, relied upon, and sought after in moments of need and decision-making. Strategic goodness also requires the courage to exercise discernment. Influence is not generated by pleasing everyone or extending kindness indiscriminately. Rather, it emerges from a careful calibration of where to invest energy, attention, and resources. The individual who masters this approach recognizes opportunities where acts of virtue will have the greatest impact, where they will cultivate loyalty, inspire action, and create alignment with shared goals. In this way, goodness is no longer a passive quality, but an active force, a lever that magnifies both personal and collective outcomes. At the heart of this transformation lies the understanding of human psychology. People are inherently drawn to those who display both competence and compassion. Strategic goodness satisfies a deep human desire for connection, guidance, and support, while simultaneously demonstrating authority and clarity of purpose. When goodness is paired with wisdom, it commands attention and respect. The individual who understands this principle does not give to be liked. They give to empower, to influence, and to shape environments and relationships that foster long-term success. This approach also reframes the concept of success itself. While unmeasured goodness may leave one feeling exhausted or underappreciated, strategic goodness positions virtue as a catalyst for achievement. By aligning generosity, support, and moral action with personal goals and the broader good, one creates a system where influence is both ethical and effective. The power of influence lies not in domination, but in the ability to inspire choices, actions, and loyalty in ways that multiply impact. One act of strategic goodness can ripple across networks, opening doors, shaping perceptions, and creating opportunities that would otherwise remain inaccessible. Furthermore, transforming goodness into influence requires patience and long-term thinking. Influence is not built overnight, and acts of virtue rarely produce immediate results in terms of power or recognition. Yet, over time, the cumulative effect of consistent, intentional action compounds. Every thoughtful gesture, every deliberate act of support, every moment of guidance strengthens reputation, builds trust, and amplifies the capacity to affect outcomes. The strategic individual understands that the greatest rewards of goodness are not always immediate, but they are enduring, exponential, and transformative. Finally, this transformation reinforces a profound truth: real power and virtue are not mutually exclusive. Many assume that to achieve influence, one must compromise morality or manipulate others. On the contrary, when goodness is wielded strategically, it enhances authority, strengthens relationships, and elevates personal and collective success. The individual who masters this balance becomes a beacon, a person whose actions inspire loyalty, respect, and alignment with vision. They understand that influence is the natural result of purposeful virtue, and that by acting with both integrity and discernment, goodness becomes the most reliable pathway to both personal fulfillment and lasting impact. As we reach the end of this journey, one truth stands out clearly. Goodness is not a simple virtue. It is a force that carries both hidden costs and extraordinary potential. When exercised blindly, without awareness or strategy, it can drain your energy, invite exploitation, and tie your sense of self-worth to the approval of others. Yet when understood, mastered, and applied with intention, goodness becomes a source of unmatched power, a tool to influence, inspire, and create impact that endures far beyond a single act or gesture. The individuals who succeed are not merely those who are kind, nor those who seek approval. They are those who combine virtue with vision, generosity with discernment, and morality with strategy. They understand that every act of kindness, every decision to help, and every gesture of support carries weight and potential. By directing goodness purposefully, they not only uplift others, but also strengthen their own influence, reputation, and personal freedom. The shocking truth, then, is this: the cost of goodness is real, but so is its power. The key lies in awareness, intentionality, and the courage to act with both heart and mind. When you navigate life with strategic virtue, you no longer give blindly, you give with impact. You no longer live for approval, you live with purpose. And in doing so, you transform goodness from a silent liability into a path of influence, success, and lasting fulfillment. Remember, every choice to act with conscious goodness is also a choice to take control of your life, to amplify your influence, and to leave a legacy that cannot be ignored. It is not enough to be good. The world rewards those who are good with purpose, intentionality, and vision. This is the hidden truth of life. Virtue is powerful, but strategic virtue is unstoppable.